Hello everyone, this is Dr. Meyer here with a video for you on the formal process known as the fugue. Let's get started. What is a fugue? A fugue is a fully developed imitative contrapuntal composition, which is related to other shorter works like inventions and canons. The fugue should always be described as a process, because no two fugues have the same form. The musical interest comes from how the independent voices interact with one another along the way. This is one of the most difficult elements of writing fugal composition. The subject of the fugue is introduced in one of the voices and is developed throughout the piece. A typical 18th century fugue has 3 to 6 independent voices. Johann Sebastian Bach is likely the composer who created the most fugues. In fact, he has one in every key. And his mastery of the fugue has led other composers to copy this style in their own works well into the 21st century. The fugue has 3 main sections, but remember, this is a process and not a cookie cutter, so these sections could be any length. Sometimes the first section, which we call the exposition, is even repeated. In that exposition, the fugue subject or the main motivic idea is stated, usually as a solo, and then imitated by the remaining voices until every voice has stated the motive. Once each voice has entered, the exposition is over. The development takes this motive and manipulates it into new key areas and molds the motive into interesting variations and interactions with the other voices. The fugue comes to a close when the motive is presented in the original tonic key. Reminder, fugue is a process, and some fugues may not even have a recapitulation at all, but instead a simple closing cadence instead of the restatement material of the subject at the end. Let's look a bit at the exposition in further detail. The motive or the subject, which we're going to use that terminology from now on, the subject, will appear in any of the voices as a solo. The other voices present either a transposed version of the subject, which we call the answer, or the same subject in tonic. When all of the voices have entered, the exposition is over. Here's an example of the voice entries in an exposition. So our soprano voice will come in with the subject, and the alto will answer at that transposed level. The tenor could come in with the subject again, and our bass finishes out the exposition with the answer. Now, this is only one possibility. There's no set sequence for the order of the voices, and occasionally you could see subject, answer, answer, subject instead of this alternation that we see right here. Lots of room for creativity in counterpoint. Here's a musical example from Bach's G minor fugue 861. The opening subject is here in the bass voice as a solo, followed immediately by the soprano voice with the answer. Notice that the answer is presented a fifth higher than the original subject. This is the practice to create more independence of the lines at the beginning of the piece. So we don't have the same subject with the same key. We can vary our counterpoint. There's definitely more nuance to building an answer, and we will be discussing that together in class, don't worry. Let's have a listen to the opening of this fugue. Notice how the bass voice continues in counterpoint with the soprano as it enters. This counterpoint might be free counterpoint, or it may be a second thematic motive that can occur throughout the fugue, which we sometimes call the counter subject. More on that in class. Here's an exposition of a fugue with 4 voices in C major. Let's listen together and see if you can find each of the subject and answer entries before the double bar in measure 6 at the bottom there. subject appears in the alto voice at the beginning. Watch out for the clefs here. We have 2 treble clefs. The answer in the dominant is in the soprano immediately following. Then we have another answer in the tenor, followed by the subject again in the bass. So we have alto, soprano, tenor, bass of our voice ordering, and an interesting subject, answer, answer, subject, not like we saw in the earlier example I posed to you. Of course, there are even more nuances and more fancy music theory terms for events that only sometimes happen in the exposition, like what if all the voices haven't entered yet and you find material that's neither subject nor answer? Don't worry, we'll dive deeper together in class, but for now, a basic understanding of the fugue will suffice. Moving on to that second section, the development. The development of the fugue has alternating sections of modulatory material and subject entries in new keys. So we call those modulatory sections episodes. Like the one here is going to have modulatory techniques like sequences to help us set up a new key. Entries or restatements are going to be full subject statements. They must contain the subject in its entirety to be considered a restatement. The contrapuntal techniques get a little tricky, and the use of the fugue subject sometimes is even used as an inspiration for an episode. So we need to make sure that we're really looking for those full statements as entries or restatements. Let's have a listen to this final episode from the G minor fugue, which is actually right before the next section, the recapitulation, back to G minor. Have a listen. The development of the fugue is where all the action takes place. So Bach and others developed a few techniques for developing that motive and the interaction between the voices. A technique for layering the subjects on top of one another is called stretto and is often seen in the development. Listen to this example of stretto. You can kind of see the subjects layering on top of each other. Other examples of motivic manipulation can have to do with the subject itself. So we have diminution, where the rhythmic values of the subject are twice as fast. We still have the same pitches, however. Augmentation is the exact opposite, so the note values are twice as long. And finally, retrogradation, or retrograde, involves writing the subject backward, keeping the same rhythmic duration, but just go in the opposite direction. Again, lots of ways to be creative when you are writing counterpoint. Now we come to that final section, the recapitulation. Here we will find at least one restatement of the subject in its entirety. Listen to the ending of this G minor fugue we've been following. Notice how there are 4 subject entries here, even in this recapitulation. Because fugue is a compositional process, there's only one required for a recapitulation. If there's not a full subject restatement, the fugue does not have a recapitulation, but will end on an episode in the original tonic. Let me say that again. Even if the fugue does not have a recapitulation, it will still end in the original tonic in which it began. Since listening to a whole fugue is rather time-consuming, your practice in this video is recalling a few key facts. So let's start. At what transposition level does the answer appear in the exposition of the fugue? The answer is at the fifth or the level of the dominant. True or false? Modulation takes place during a subject restatement in the development. The answer is false. Modulation will take place during an episode. Finally, in what key area does the recapitulation take place? That will be the original tonic key. What did you learn about fugue in this video? Well, fugue is a compositional process. There is a general outline and expectation, but the content of those sections play out in various ways with varying techniques. We generally have three large sections: the exposition, development, and the recapitulation, each with their own idiosyncrasies, like the exposition voice order or the developmental key areas, and the existence, or not, of the recapitulation. Remember that J.S. Bach championed this form, but composers have been emulating this style ever since. Now go listen to some fugues and start analyzing. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.